In the Middle Ages, nothing struck fear more. Like the word siege, it meant isolation, starvation, disease, and eventually, surrender or death. Castles that had once symbolized power could become tombs, and armies outside the walls weren't just waiting. They were building, tunneling, firing, and planning your end. This is the brutal logic behind medieval castle sieges, where strategy, engineering, and sheer endurance decided who lived and who fell. In medieval Europe, battles were dramatic, but often brief. Sieges, by contrast, were slow, exhausting, and deadly. They were never the first choice, but when a fortified castle blocked a campaign, there was little alternative. Siege warfare was a high-stakes gamble. It demanded time, money, manpower, and the risk of failure. Because once you committed to a siege, there was no easy way out. You either took the castle or left in defeat. 3 outcomes were possible. First, a successful assault, where attackers broke through and took the fortress by force. In such cases, mercy was rare. If the siege had been costly, the victors often looted, executed, or enslaved the inhabitants. Second, a negotiated surrender. If terms were agreed, noble defenders might be spared, even allowed to keep some belongings. But commoners? They often lost everything: homes, freedom, or even their lives. The third outcome, a failed siege, was humiliating. Attackers might retreat after weeks or months of wasted effort. For defenders, surrender was always a bitter choice, but sometimes it was wiser than starving behind the walls. To siege a castle, attackers needed more than just swords. They needed engineers, sappers, siege weapons, and logistics. And most importantly, time. A medieval siege might begin with offers, surrender, or face the consequences. If refused, the attackers would surround the castle, a tactic called investment. No one in, no one out. Supplies would run low, morale would collapse. Then came the machines: battering rams to smash gates, siege towers to scale walls, catapults and trebuchets to rain down stone and fire. And if the walls still stood, miners would tunnel beneath them, using timber and pig fat to collapse entire towers with fire. This required experts, military engineers, carpenters, masons. Maintaining such a force cost a fortune, so only kings, powerful lords, or invading armies could sustain long sieges. But sometimes commanders didn't want to wait. They stormed the walls with escalades, ladders under enemy fire, or rolled in wooden towers taller than the battlements. In England, at the Siege of Rochester in 1215, King John ordered miners to dig beneath the keep. He even used fat from 40 pigs to burn the timber supports. A corner of the keep collapsed, and the castle fell. For the defenders, survival depended on preparation. A well-built castle was more than stone walls. It was a machine designed to resist siege. The first priority, supplies. Castles were stocked with salted meat, dried grains, barrels of ale, and fresh water from wells or cisterns. Larger castles even had gardens and livestock, chickens, goats, sometimes even cows, inside the walls. Second, defensive structures. Curtain walls with walkways gave archers full view of attackers. Arrow slits allowed bowmen to fire while staying protected. Murder holes in gatehouses let defenders drop rocks, boiling water, or hot sand on invaders below. Some castles used clever design tricks. Concentric castles, like those in Edward I's Welsh campaigns, had multiple walls, one inside another, making each layer harder to breach. Moats, steep hills, and tight spiral staircases favored defenders in close combat. And when attackers built siege towers or started mining, Defenders countered with fire, sorties, or their own miners to collapse tunnels before damage was done. In many sieges, engineering duels took place underground, a silent war beneath the surface. But even the strongest castle had one weakness: time. The longer a siege dragged on, the worse it got, for both sides. Food ran low, disease spread, bodies piled up, and morale, perhaps the most fragile resource, began to crumble. In the winter, cold and hunger were deadly. In summer, dysentery and plague could wipe out entire camps. A single sick horse could poison a well. One dead body catapulted over the wall could trigger an epidemic. At Kenilworth in 1266, one of England's longest sieges, the defenders held out for 6 months through hunger, illness, and constant bombardment. But in the end, they surrendered, not from battle, but from exhaustion. For the attackers, keeping soldiers fed and disciplined was a challenge. Desertion, mutiny, or simply boredom could end a siege before a single wall cracked. Over the centuries, siege technology evolved. Early on, catapults and mangonels were used to hurl stones or fire, but by the 13th century, the trebuchet had become the king of siege engines. These massive machines, powered by counterweights, could launch 100-kilogram stones over castle walls. They were so powerful that some castles were rebuilt with sloped walls just to deflect their impact. The arrival of gunpowder in Europe marked a turning point in siege warfare, one that would ultimately spell the end of the traditional medieval castle. At first, gunpowder weapons were unreliable and crude, small bombards that were as likely to explode as to fire. But by the 15th century, cannon had become larger, more stable, and devastatingly effective. These early artillery pieces could fire stone or iron balls with enough force to break apart the thickest curtain walls. Unlike trebuchets, which lobbed stones in high arcs, cannons delivered their payload with blunt, unstoppable force. Walls that had once withstood months of siege could collapse after just a few days of bombardment. Castles that had been architectural marvels, with towers, moats, and concentric walls, were now vulnerable to a single, well-placed battery. No amount of bravery or clever defense could stop iron balls from smashing through centuries-old stone. The psychology of siege warfare changed too, where once the goal was to starve a garrison into submission, now victory could come quickly, through overwhelming firepower. It was the beginning of a new era where stone fortresses gave way to star forts, earthworks, and gunpowder empires. Sieges were never just about weapons or walls. They were battles of endurance, planning, and willpower. Behind every fortress stood people, defenders holding on to the last loaf of bread, attackers building towers under fire, kings watching time slip away. In the quiet between battles, siege warfare defined the rhythm of medieval conflict. Slow, methodical, and often more devastating than open war. And that's what made medieval sieges so terrifying. You could have strong walls, brave men, and a loyal cause. But if the enemy had time, patience, and fire, your castle would fall. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future videos. Your support really helps this channel grow, and I truly appreciate it. See you in the next one.